Great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuhan,
Hi.
and I'll be emceeing our final session for today with Julia Novy-Hildesley. So Julia Novy-Hildesley is Professor of the Practice and Executive Director of Stanford's Change Leadership for Sustainability program, which includes a Sustainability Science and Practice Interdisciplinary Master's degree. Her research and teaching focus on business strategies, leadership approaches, and cross-sector partnerships that spur global development and align systems with the goal of intergenerational well-being. With over 20 years of experience leading nonprofit and philanthropic organizations, Julia is recognized for her innovative leadership in designing and scaling entrepreneurial solutions to global challenges that integrate economic, social, and environmental objectives. A Fulbright and Marshall Scholar, Julia Novy speaks French, Spanish, and Kiswahili, and has lived and worked extensively in developing countries for agencies. Today, Julia will discuss how Stanford's sustainability program works toward preparing leaders to advance sustainability. So without further ado, welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Kuhan. Thanks so much. And thank you, everyone who's making time to join today. Happy Saturday. And Nick, if you could go ahead and cue up the slides, that would be great. Looking forward to talking with all of you about this idea of a new leader, someone who can help us accelerate the transition to sustainability. Next slide. Just to give you a brief overview, the next slide, please. We will be briefly talking about the existential risk we face with our current strategy for economic development, the radical change we need, the role of these new leaders in action, and a few concluding thoughts. So next slide. What you can see from this next slide is that the approach that we've used for quite some time since the Industrial Revolution is one that is dependent on heavy extraction of natural resources to fuel our economic development. And we've certainly made a lot of progress in terms of life expectancy around the world, decreases in child mortality and maternal health improvements, et cetera, through this strategy. But we still have 2.5 billion people who are not yet in the middle class, and continuing with this development strategy would really actually require, according to a recent study by Accenture, 3 planet Earth's worth of natural resources. So clearly we can't continue on this trajectory and meet the needs of people. Next slide. In addition, if you look here at some work by the Stockholm Resilience Center, but also corroborated by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, many studies by the National Academies of Sciences, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are going beyond planetary boundaries. We are beyond the safe operating space on a number of fronts. Here with the Stockholm Resilience Center work, you see in terms of climate change, biodiversity loss, nitrogen flows into oceans and streams, really exceeding the natural systems of the earth and what they can sustain. Other boundaries we are approaching as well. So in this sense, we are facing existential risk because of the development strategy we've chosen to pursue. Next slide. As we pursue this, we've also, we face a lot of disparities. There are over 1 billion people who remain illiterate, who do not have access to adequate shelter, access to safe water, sanitation, electricity, and many who are undernourished. And as we see in the United States and all around the world, there are huge disparities in wealth within countries and also beyond. So all of this is to say that radical change is needed. If we go to the next slide. We are really thinking about what kind of systems change do we need to make to pull back from the existential threat we face and to transition to what we call a sustainable society. Next slide. So really, when we think about this transition, we can think of it as massive and radical systems change. So rapid change and large scale change, moving from our current systems, what you see there at the bottom of the diagram, current reality, these systems that are generating perverse outcomes that are potentially self-terminating, to a vision of what we want, which, as we call it at Stanford in our sustainability program, intergenerational well-being, a concept of inclusive intergenerational well-being, which is about the well-being of all people, and not just the privileged few, and not just this generation, but across generations. And of course, that includes the living planet, which completely sustains us. Next slide. So as we think about driving this dramatic systems change, we need to think about where can we intervene. And system scientist Donella Meadows is famous for thinking about all of the different places we can intervene in systems to drive dramatic change. And what she has identified in her work is that mindset is the highest point of leverage to intervene in any system. So hence the importance of the new leader. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk a little about sort of who these new leaders are that we believe can potentially pull us back from this existential threat we face due to our current development path, and allow us to shift to radically accelerate the transition to a more this bit. We see that one attribute of the new leader, please click Nick, are resilience mindsets. Okay, so they are distinguished as individuals by bringing resilience mindsets to the transformation. Combine this, if we do the next click, with a very powerful purpose. And that really is the purpose of intergenerational well-being, as I described. So they are committed to this purpose of intergenerational well-being. And through that, if we click again, we can see that that is their strategy for driving transformation, right? So they combine the resilience mindsets they bring with this dedicated purpose to advance intergenerational well-being, and the transformations they pursue because of these mindsets are highly integrated, holistic approaches to advancing sustainability. We go to the next slide. I just want to share a little bit, if we click one more time, about my journey, thinking about leadership and change makers in the world who are working on sustainability, working to advance sustainability. I began with research on integrated conservation and development projects, spent a year living in my tent actually in the rainforest of Madagascar, looking at sustainable economic alternatives to slash and burn agriculture. You can see here, this is one of the most biologically important places on Earth, which has been now designated a national park. At the time I was working there in the early 90s, there was intention to create a national park, but a recognition of many, many communities who lived in that area. And so there was a need to integrate this goal of conservation with also sustainable livelihoods and the development of the people who live there. So that is one lens through which I've seen sustainability leadership take place. If we go to the next click. Another area that I worked extensively in is market-based strategies or solutions to environmental challenges. And this was through my work with the Marine Stewardship Council, a partnership between World Wildlife Fund and Unilever, and in particular working with community-based fisheries and indigenous communities who had artisanal fisheries around the world who were trying to benefit from this opportunity to use a global standard and a certification approach to eco-label or identify their products as being sustainably sourced and therefore gain market access, perhaps preferential pricing. Leaders take is using the market to radically shift behavior in greater alignment with sustainability. Third on this slide is another avenue of exploration. For 10 years, I worked as the executive director of the Lemelson Foundation, and there worked to support $100 million of investment in innovators and entrepreneurs in Africa, Asia, and Latin America who are working on designing and scaling innovations to meet the needs and advance sustainability for people who are earning less than $5 a day. And so through these experiences over the past 30 years, and also with a look at resilience and the kind of orientations that give rise to resilience by looking across disciplines, including ecology and psychology, military strategy and neuroscience. If we go to the next slide, what I came to conclude is that three mindsets seem to be very present in these effective sustainability leaders, who I'm calling the new leaders, the leaders who are capable of leading this dramatic transition that we need from our current operating systems to ones that align with this goal of intergenerational well-being. And those orientations in brief are connect, a mindset of connecting, a mindset of adapting, and a mindset of innovating. So let's start with connect mindset first. This is really about, leaders do it kind of an inside out approach from the self out to the broader system. So the connect mindset is first connecting with oneself, being an authentic leader, knowing who you are, what motivates you, and therefore being able to connect effectively with others because of your authenticity, and having empathy and the capacity for vulnerability so that trust can be formed, relationships can be built, and partnerships can be developed. The Connect mindset also spans to the broader world, seeing the interdependence of our world, the interdependence of people with one another, as we've seen so much through COVID, how interdependent we all are, and also the interdependence of people and the natural world. So that, in sum, is the Connect mindset. The Adapt mindset, also very prevalent in new leaders, is a mindset of openness, a mindset of, as we learn, as we start seeing these systems connections and connecting with diverse people, we have an mindedness to say, we've got to upgrade our orientation. We've got to upgrade to keep orienting based on a deeper understanding of reality. And what we see with the new leaders is their Adapt mindset, which kind of follows this Connect mindset, allows them to recognize the importance of aligning our strategies for development with a much more holistic and integrated approach because of the recognition of how interdependent and interconnected we are with one another and with natural systems. Finally, the Innovate mindset is essential. And this is really when we see new leaders designing new strategies, models, approaches, businesses, products, advance intergenerational well-being, and that derive from a deep understanding of interconnectedness, and as I said, to align with this goal of intergenerational well-being. You'll notice in the center of this diagram also is the word purpose, and that is really to emphasize that new leaders, they use these resilience mindsets, but in service of this higher purpose, the self-transcendent purpose of intergenerational well-being. Okay, if we go to the next slide, this is back to the systems change diagram we saw earlier. So this is kind of the space that new leaders are operating in, and they recognize that these systems that we're working to change are very complex, highly interdependent, dynamic systems. And so if we click here, you can see the new leader stepping into this space with the mindsets of connecting, adapting, and innovating, and with the approaches, if we click again, that are holistic and integrated. So the new leader steps into this systems world that's highly dynamic, complex, uncertain. They bring these resilience mindsets with this clear purpose of advancing intergenerational well-being, and therefore the kinds of approaches and models that they invent and innovate are holistic and integrated, because those are the kinds of models that work in an interdependent system, right? We have kind of traditionally pursued approaches that optimize one thing at the expense of something else, or benefit one group at the expense of another, or maximize profit, but there's social and environmental costs. New leaders, because they see things as fully connected, do not innovate approaches that don't make sense for the whole. Okay, so let's move on, and I'd like to just tell some stories about new leaders and give you a sense of how they are putting these resilience mindsets combined with their clear purpose of sustainability together to drive transformational change. And I guess I want to start first with a story about a failure, a failed attempt to drive positive change. Great intentions, but a failed attempt that I was first exposed to when I was actually a senior at Stanford. I did a minor in African studies, and that's me in the top left corner. I lived with a family in Tanzania my senior year and was studying Kiswahili. And as part of my work in Tanzania, I was studying over there. If you look at the other three photographs, I lived in a community for a period of time, and I got to know this community quite well. And one thing that happened is a very well-meaning NGO had come in with a smokeless cook stove that they thought would be of huge benefit to this community. What they had witnessed is that women and children who were often in the huts, like you can see in the top right there, were cooking inside on an open fire, and there was a lot of smoke in those huts, and they were worried about indoor air pollution and the respiratory illness for the families, particularly women and children. They also noticed that women were walking up to 10 miles per day to collect firewood from the Usambara Mountains to bring back. That was not only arduous, but also was leading to real deforestation and soil erosion problems in the region. So the smokeless cook stove seemed to make a lot of sense. However, it did not work. It was completely rejected by the community. And I had enough relationship with the women in particular and the community overall to learn after this NGO left and after this I just that women actually and families wanted some smoke in their huts because that smoke kept mosquitoes at bay. And they were more concerned about sudden or more imminent death from malaria than longer-term respiratory illness. In addition, while it was definitely arduous to go and collect fuel wood, women appreciated that time when they were totally alone with one another to strategize and discuss problems they were having with their families, how they might organize to address those challenges, and they did not want to give up that time. There were other reasons as well, including insecurity about how this sawdust, which was going to fuel the cook stove, would be provided, and whether that was about changing from cooking on an open flame, the corn that they like to cook that way, to switching cooking. The line is particularly the foundational mindset of the connect mindset, to truly connect, build trust. Of priorities and of why things are currently the way they are. So if we go to the next slide, sort of want to contrast this with other organizations I've had a chance to work with and new leaders that I've had a chance to observe who truly are applying these resilience mindsets with a clear sense of purpose to amazing woman who founded the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, which now has over 1.6 million members. It's the largest self-employed association in the world. And she first connected with women, understanding that 94% of women in India at the time were self-employed. So they were outside of the formal economy, did not have any support. And what she did was she adapted some of these labor associations that she had been involved with that were Gandhian labor associations for textile work, the rights of textile workers, to the needs of women. Because what she saw is even with those textile associations that were so well designed, women were not truly served. Their needs were not truly being addressed. And so she created the Self-Employed Women's Association based on really first connecting with this challenge that women were facing, adapting a model that was already present, and then innovating a range of approaches that really serve the needs of women, including developing for this association ways for women to meet together, support one another, help each other pay back loans. They innovated a bank that served these women in particular, created business development services to increase the business development capacities of these independent entrepreneurs, and a number of other services. They also partnered with an organization that I got to know quite well at the Lemelson Foundation, because we invested in this company, both with grants and loans and equity investments. The organization is called Selco, the Solar Electric Light Company in India. And Harish Hande, pictured there at the bottom left, is another amazing new leader. So Harish spent a lot of time connecting with rural communities in India to try to understand their energy needs. And one of the things he discovered is that that communities were highly dependent on kerosene and were not getting the kind of electricity services that they actually needed. And so he spent quite a bit of time understanding this need, understanding the kind of products that might be helpful. And then he adapted traditional solar technology designed for kind of larger scale to meet the needs of much more rural homes and smaller scale needs, which you can see here pictured on the right. But in addition to kind of adapting the technology, he really innovated an entire business model around design and delivery of this particular technology. So for example, he partnered with Sewa, and a number of the female entrepreneurs of Sewa began to sell or lease the solar lighting systems that Harish had innovated, because their 1.6 million members needed access to clean, reliable electricity and wanted to get off their dependence on kerosene. Another just brief story of very creative innovation that was derived from really connecting with people is he asked people, how much do you think you could pay for this system if you were to lease it? Do you think you could pay maybe 300 rupees a month or something? Would that work? And I said, oh no, we could not do that. Maybe we could pay 10 rupees a day. And then he kind of thought, well, that's actually about the same, but clearly it's because people don't want to have to save. I mean, he found out by asking that didn't want to have to save the money, but having regular collection. So he designed that would allow groups of women and other money and pay on a daily basis for this service rather than to have to save it. He also did very innovative things in terms of working with bank loan officers to convince them that these individuals were bankable, that they would increase productivity and incomes as a result of having access to reliable electricity, and bought down the cost of loans initially in order to get the banks to lend money to entrepreneurs who wanted to buy these solar lighting systems. And then once it was proven, the banks could take it further. So let's go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about Sustainable Harvest, which is a benefit corporation. Again, the founder, Dave Griswold, pictured in the top right there, very much a new leader, built his whole organizational model on a relationship coffee model. So really based on this mindset of connecting. He wanted to connect the entire supply chain of the coffee industry so that there would be much more transparency, so that growers and farmers would really know how to improve the quality of their coffee to secure better prices, and how to access global markets in a way that would be fair and equitable to them. So he designed this relationship coffee model, required that there was total transparency in the supply chain. Everyone at every step would know exactly the price that everyone else was getting. And he also, as a new leader does, recognize that integrating financial, social, and environmental outcomes and values was very important. And so he plowed a lot of the company's profits back into farmer training to improve the capacity of farmers to grow higher quality coffee through better composting and picking techniques and drying techniques, and also in terms of learning to taste their own coffee and learn what premium coffee tasted like, and how to kind of gradually know how to talk directly with importers about the quality of their coffee and secure much better prices than they could through middlemen. He also innovated a number of strategies like the Let's Talk Coffee event, pictured there in the bottom right, where the entire coffee supply chain would be brought together. Farmers, but also bankers, roasters, retailers, exporters, importers, all coming together to really understand holistically the coffee supply chain and the challenges faced by any particular member in that supply chain. Also information on investments that needed to be made for farmers to help them along, or issues with global pricing and price shocks and what was happening there. So a real opportunity to share information across the supply chain. And I just want to mention briefly on the bottom left, you can see Sustainable Harvest is a certified benefit corporation. This is a manifestation of a new way of doing business that integrates social, economic, and environmental outcomes, that says all stakeholders, not just shareholders, are important when we think about business. And there is now legislation that allows companies to be certified as benefit corporations, or B corporations rather. And there are now over 3,000 B corporations in the world in 60 countries. And this is an example of how we can actually shift the kind of premise upon which we do business to align with the goals of sustainability. Next slide. Just briefly, I want to mention Unilever, which is a Dutch transnational corporation that has done this at a transnational corporation scale. Paul Pullman, pictured there, has been a very powerful advocate for the need of business to really think broadly about the stakeholders it touches and far beyond the shareholders. One of his famous quotes is that he says, I don't think our fiduciary duty is to put shareholders first. I say the opposite. What we firmly believe is that if we focus our company on improving the lives of the world's citizens and come up with genuine, sustainable solutions, we are more in sync with consumers and society, and ultimately, this will result in good shareholder returns. And so under his leadership, Unilever established a sustainable living plan, aligned the entire organization behind that plan, and tied compensation to targets of achieving progress on that plan, got rid of shareholder quarterly reports, because he said that really drove them to short-termism when long-term focus was necessary. And the logos on the top left and top right illustrate also something really critical that a number of new leaders do, which is thinking about scale and how to leverage large-scale partnerships to drive sector-wide change or systems-level change. And so on the left there, the Marine Stewardship Council, the certification effort I mentioned earlier, that was a partnership between Unilever and World Wildlife Fund, a really important partnership that helped create a global market-based approach to improving the sustainability of fisheries through a certification process. And on the right there, an effort to bring together competitors, governments, nonprofit organizations, and others to say, we have got to stop cutting down the rainforests of Indonesia and elsewhere to produce, palm oil plantations to create palm oil for our consumer goods. We need to think about ways of eliminating deforestation from the supply chain of palm oil, and we need to gather diverse actors in doing so. So I'll just briefly, because I think we're running low on time and I want to create time for a couple of questions, just mention the circular economy as one strategy pursued by new leaders in terms of thinking, okay, we've got to move to making our economy work a bit more like natural systems, where any waste generated is actually nutrients in the system that can be taken up, recycled, and reused to drive the system. And so there are a number of new leaders, such as Bridget Croak on the left and Eben Baer on the right, who have done just tremendous work innovating products and also ecosystem support services to help us move from a very linear kind of take, make, waste economic model for production and manufacturing to one of circularity. So let me stop there and just see if there are any questions from the audience, and look forward to hearing thoughts and reactions. So thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, in the interest of time, maybe I'll just ask one or two quick questions. But the top audience question is, so in your presentation, you emphasize the importance of connections and partnerships for new leaders. How do you think this applies with respect to empathy towards future generations, where making these connections obviously isn't possible?
Interesting. Okay. And should I put on video at this point, or is that still not working well?
Yeah. Maybe let's try it and see if it's bad. We can tell you to turn it off again.
Okay. Great. Okay. Oops. All right. There. How's that? Okay. Sorry. Yeah, we had a little trouble with the computer system, so that's why we're doing this. But so empathy with future generations. I mean, I think that is about really feeling the interconnectedness we have. And I think new leaders are very oriented that way, to really see interconnectedness and to understand that fundamentally. And I guess what also happens, maybe the best way to answer that is to say that if you really see yourself as part of an interconnected system, you then also have a lot of gratitude for what you receive from that system. I mean, when you think about it, everything we need to survive and thrive is provided to us by this incredible planet that we have. And so when you start recognizing that, you come from a place of gratitude. And then that often leads to a place of responsibility and reciprocity, because you recognize what you're receiving, and you recognize that you're part of this, and therefore you feel responsibility also to contribute. And that then drives reciprocity. And I think with those kinds of mindsets that really stem from the connect mindset, that allows us to stretch to future generations through the sense of responsibility, through the sense of gratitude, through the sense of reciprocity.
Awesome. And maybe I'll ask one last quick question before wrapping up today. So I'm curious to hear, you emphasize mindset shifts as fundamental for new leaders. Through your experience and directing Stanford's sustainability program, are there any patterns or specific stimuli that come to mind that are, often engender shifts in mindset?
It's a great question. That's a great question. I mean, certainly crisis can help spur a shift in mindset. And I think, we do have this tremendous opportunity coming on the heels of both the global pandemic and at least in the US, the incredible awakening to systemic racism and the violence that so many have suffered as a result. And so I think experiencing, and just kind of coming to our knees as a result of that and the global pandemic, it's an opportunity to see and to see more clearly. And I think both of those, in terms of the connect mindset, really support an awakening to that mindset, because, we're all completely connected, as you can see with the, pandemic, and being everyone concerned about spreading disease to one another, right? But we're also totally connected socially. And if there's not social justice somewhere, there's not social justice anywhere, and there can be no sustainability and no intergenerational well-being. And that is all, it's all connected. So I do think crisis can be. I also think, exposure to people and to learning and to knowledge, which is why we invest so much in the sustainability program to, reach these emerging new leaders, and some existing leaders who may not yet have really embraced these mindsets. So we have an executive education program to really reach existing leaders of influence, and this program to help influence the mindsets of emerging leaders through master's degree students.
Amazing. All right, so that's all the time we have for this session. Thank you again, Julia, for a wonderful talk and for taking the time to talk to us about your expertise today.
It's my pleasure.
I'm really excited for Sari to partner up with the sustainability program moving forward, given our shared goals of educating the leaders of tomorrow to prioritize sustainability and the well-being of future generations.
Likewise, we are too. We've loved our collaboration so far. Wonderful students and faculty, and just very important work. So it's great.
Thank you.